Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are continuing to the second half of Journal Collection number 50, dating from the year 1859. And this particular spot that we're starting in is in June of that year, and it starts with a short little quotation. It doesn't say who it's from, but it's in Latin, but the editor has kindly given us the English translation, so I'll read that and then proceed to the entry for June. Outwardly joyous, inwardly wise. June. I learned that the rhyme is there in the theme, thought, and image themselves. I learned that there is a beyond to every place, and the bird moving through the air by successive dartings taught me. Simonides made an epigram in commendation of his memory. Then there's an untranslated Greek quotation here. Nobody has a memory like to Simonides, the man of 80 years, the son of Leoprepus. Certain persons utter oracles, as Bettine, as Aunt Mary, as Alcott and Charles Newcomb. We hear awe-struck that the ancients recognized an omen or fatum now and then in chance words spoken, and we cast about and wonder what these oracles were, and we hear some remark which explains our own character or foible or circumstance, and it does not occur to us that this is the very chance those ancients considered. This is the omen and fatum, but these oracles are simply perceptions of the intellect, and whenever the intellect acts, there is an oracle. Nature wishes that woman should attract man, but she has cunningly made them with a little sarcasm in expression, which seems to say, quote, Yes, I am willing to attract, but to attract a little better kind of man than I yet see. Editor's note. The following is the first form of the thought which, turned to verse, is the motto of the essay Worship, and is printed in the poems. End note. Bridle him, yes, but he takes the bridle in his teeth. He invented locks and bolts, can unlock his own. This is he who invented the electric horse. He can swim across the ocean and arrive in Asia at an earlier date than he left New York. Throw him to the lions, but this is Androcles, Van Amberg. The lions lick his feet. Fire will not burn him, but plays the part of St. Irenaeus, flames, namely, of a wall or a vaulted shrine bending around and over him without harm. The South has too large concession to begin with. Disunion is excellent if it is just disunion enough, but if it go too far, 'tis bad. Is the Union a conveniency only, like the United States Bank, which enabled a man to put his pocket bills, which were current everywhere, and so made us citizens from Canada to the Gulf? The insanity of the South, I acquit them of guilt on that plea, quote, but never more be officer of mine, end quote. A footnote states, Othello's dismissal of his lieutenant for drunkenness. I love thee, Cassio, but never more be officer of mine. End footnote. They come to our colleges, they travel in Europe, they marry here. They hear at Columbia College Dr. Lieber's lectures. Europeans go, like Goss, into Alabama and write as he about the damnation, and such is the esprit de corps, that the reason is dethroned. I see for such madness no hellebore. All things have an accompaniment of magic. If the fact seems plain and thoroughly known to thee, 'tis plain thou knowest nothing about it. Alston, the painter, came at last to say with alarm, I have at last painted a picture which contents me. Magic needs finer organs, and its own time. You must not look at fireflies by daylight. A man must be a mystic or worshipper. He must carry with him an unsounded secret, or he is worthless. Quote, Power as such is not known to the angels. It must be magically easy. Bettine is a wise child with her wit, humor, will, and pure inspirations. She utters oracles and is the best critic of Goethe. Her talk about music and manners and character is like Charles Auchester's, but he has no wit like her fine things about the quote-unquote flat seventh. 'Tis easy to see that Carlyle has learned of Goethe his literary manners, and how to be condescending and courteous, and yet to keep himself always in rein. But when Bettine writes from Vienna her admirable reports of her conversation with Beethoven, Goethe, and his reply comes out at last of his shell, and pays homage to Beethoven he has not expressed for any other, calls himself a layman before his demon-possessed person, and offers to meet him at Carlsbad, etc. Volume 2, page 217. But in Varnhagen's journals, Bettine makes a far different appearance, and never to her advantage. Bettine says of the Frau Rath, quote, "She let me do as I pleased, and gave my manner of being no name." Quote, "I am in low esteem with the Philistines who find a row of talents valuable in a woman, but not the woman herself without these." Very little reliance must be put on the common stories of Mr. Webster's or of Mr. Choate's learning, their Greek, or their varied literature. That ice won't bear. Reading, to what purpose did they read? Poor C. He is properly punished for his hypocritical church deaconing, etc., by having this poor dunce of Dr. A. braying over his grave that Jesus Christ is getting on for Mr. C. has signified his good opinion. Even the old Jehovah himself, good times must be coming to him for Mr. C., etc. Fame is the impression that a fine soul makes of itself. Many a man has done no one thing up to his fame, yet the fame was inevitable. In reading prose I am sensible as soon as a sentence drags, but in reading poetry as soon as one word drags. Quote, "But had I known that he loved rhyme as much as you say he does, I should have hugged him," said Johnson of Adam Smith. When the railroad bridge breaks, or the road is washed away by the freshet, it is because the company breaks and its integrity is corrupted. Shall the, quote, "groundworks be all one cracking and pulverization?" Quote, 33 Henry VIII. It is ordered that no person above the age of 24 shall shoot with the light flight arrow at a distance under 220 yards. 220 yards, then, was the effective range for fighting purposes of the heavy war arrow. Latimer says, quote, "My father taught me how to lay my body in the bow, not to draw with strength of arm as other nations do, but with a strength of body." Froude. Alcott said that Cowley considered the use of a university to be for the cherishing of gifted persons. It is true that the university and the church, which should be counterbalancing institutions and independent, do now express the sentiment of the popular politics, and the popular optimism, whatever it be. Harvard College has no voice in Harvard College, but State Street votes its down on every ballot. Everything will be permitted there which goes to adorn Boston Whiggism. It is geology, astronomy, poetry, antiquities, art, rhetoric, but that which it exists for, to be a fountain of novelties out of heaven, a Delphi uttering warning and ravishing oracles to elevate and lead mankind. That it shall not be permitted to do or to think of. On the contrary, every generosity of thought is suspected and gets a bad name. And all the young men come out decrepit Bostonians, not a poet, not a prophet, not a daemon, but is gagged and stifled or driven away. All that is sought in the instruction is drilling tutors and not inspirers. May. The spring is the inundation of love, the marriage of the plants, the marriage of bird, beast, reptile, of the animal world, and of man, is the aim of all this new glory of color and form. Our doctrine must begin with the necessary and eternal, and discriminate fate from the necessary. There is no limitation about the eternal. Thought, will, is co-eternal with the world, and as soon as intellect is awakened in any man, it shares so far of the eternity. is of the maker, not of the made. But fate is the name we give to the action of that one eternal, all various necessity on the brute myriads, whether in things, animals, or in men, in whom the intellect poor is not yet opened. To such it is only a burning wall which hurts those who run against it. The great day is the birth of perception, which instantly throws him on the party of the eternal. He sees what must be, and that it is not more that which must be than it is that which should be or what is best. To be then becomes the infinite good, and breath is jubilation. A breath of will blows through the universe eternally in the direction of the right or necessary. It is the air which all intellects inhale and exhale, and all things are blown or moved by it in order and orbit. The secret of the will is that it doth what it knows absolutely good to be done, or so is greater than itself, and is divine in doing, whilst other choices are of an appetite or of a disease, as of an itching skin, or of a thief or sot or striker. Nature is the memory of the mind, said Alcott. But come how it will, the only men of any account in nature are the 3 or 5 we have beheld who have a will. Then we say, here is a man, and men obey him. His body is sweet and not putrid like others. His words are loaded, and all around him is eventful. Come, then, count your reasons. 1. The belief in fate is unwholesome, and can only be good where it teaches the strength of nature to man. 2. We only value a stroke of will. He alone is happy who has will. The rest are herds. He uses, they are used. 3. This will derives from the aboriginal nature as perception of the eternal necessity. It rests on God himself that it is its power to shock, that it betrays his presence in this loafer. But it winds through dark channels, and one knows not how it arrived here. It is a sharing of the true order of the world, and a push in that interest and direction. It is born freedom in the intellect. On that bright moment when we are born into thought, we are instantaneously uplifted out of the rank we had. Now we are of the maker, not of the made. Now all things have such a look as the horse which we drive. But is there not another element or people who are strong through love alone? August 16th. The parrot. She has good uses for a detached family. Pole is a socialist and knits a neighborhood very soon. Every child stops before the gate to say, Pole wants a cracker, and is promptly answered by Pole. When there is a lull, to prevent all life going to ennui, Pole scolds and screeches. Then if you feed her and talk to her, rallies and shows her refinement by the sudden gentleness and delicacy of her tones. If she cannot say all that she is reputed to say, she still, as Anne O'Brien affirmed, makes a beautiful offer to say it. Then what a terrible test of people's truth was Pole, to hear what they told of her. I saw Dr. Henry J. Bigelow's bird, Mino, about the size of a catbird, black with a yellow collar. His speech was articulate as a man's. What's your name? How do you do? Go away. Dr. Bigelow. Mino. And a loud whistle like a locomotive's were his utterances. Editor's note. In the end of July or early in August, Mr. Emerson made an excursion to Wachusett, the mountain 30 miles away, which, like a blue whale, seems swimming southward along Concord's western horizon. On his way down the steep path he sprained his foot so badly that he was crippled, and consequently his health suffered for 2 or 3 months, as will appear later in this journal. It was on a visit to Boston's eminent surgeon that he saw this remarkable speaking bird. End note. Then there are 2 Greek words untranslated. You think a farm and broad acres a solid property, but its value is flowing like water. It requires as much watching as if you were decanting wine from a hogshead. Bent, the farmer knows what to do with it and decants wine, but a blunderhead, comes out of Cornhill and it all leaks away. So is it with houses as with ships. What say you to the permanent value of an estate invested in railroad stocks? The secret of the charm which English castles and cathedrals have for us in the conviction they impress that the art and the race that made these is utterly gone. 'Tis fine to tell us that, chemically, diamond is identical with coal cinder, if there is no science in the world that can reform such a crystal. And I must respect the men who built Westminster Abbey, since they have left no posterity who can do the like. Beatitudes of Intellect. Am I not one of these days to write consecutively of the beatitude of intellect? It is too great for feeble souls, and they are overexcited. The wine glass shakes, and the wine is spilled. What then? The joy which will not let me sit in my chair, which brings me bolt upright to my feet, and sends me striding around my room like a tiger in his cage, and I cannot have composure and concentration enough even to set down in English words the thought which thrills me. Is not that a joy, a certificate of the elevation? What if I never write a book or a line? For a moment the eyes of my eyes were opened. The affirmative experience remains and consoles through all suffering. For art, for music, overthrilled, the wine-glass shakes, the wine is spilled. I admire those undescribable hints that power gives of itself. I find sublime that essence of the man which makes him pass for more than his performances, though he never told his secret, is aware that a few private persons alone know him, and not one of them thoroughly. 'Tis a great misfortune of certain temperaments that they are by their own force, or too much determination, thrown out of all sympathy, and are thereafter inconvertible. They cannot be made to see when they are in the wrong, and when they are rushing to ruin, taking the bits in their teeth, they are then triumphantly assured of their innocency, and mere Phocion scorning the universe of objectors. Argument, appeal to bystanders, to a world of bystanders, masses of opposing fact, all is wasted. It is only oil to flame, only mountains of confirmation to their insanity. In these tragic cases, their own talent, acuteness, cannot help them. Even genius, as in Aunt Mary, only widens the hopeless chasm. What is the poetic interest of the lost Pleiad for so many minds? Each nun or hermit in the country towns has heard that there were once 7 stars, and now the eye can count but 6. No matter about the fact, it is a numerous cluster, and more or fewer can be counted, as your eyes are better or worse. But the legend is, as I have said, and each nun or hermit is struck with the circumstance, and writes solitary verses about it. What is the charm of the incident? I think because it is to each a symbol of lost thoughts. Winckelmann dates from Pericles or Augustus or the Renaissance, Hallam from the Revival or the Reformation, Coleridge from Shakespeare, but the intellect from itself. We like a person of will and of thought because there is nobody behind his chair. It is the year 1, and the emperor is here. One wrong step. On Wachusett I sprained my foot. It was slow to heal, and I went to the doctor's. Dr. Henry Bigelow said, "Splint and absolute rest." Dr. Russell said, "Rest, yes, but a splint, no." Dr. Bartlett said, "Neither splint nor rest, but go and walk." Dr. Russell said, "Pour water on the foot, but it must be warm." Dr. Jackson said, "Stand in a trout brook all day." When I sprained my foot, I soon found it was all one as if I had sprained my head, if I must sit in my chair. Then I thought nature had sprained her foot, and that King Lear had never sprained his, or he would have thought there were worse evils than unkind daughters. When I see a man unhappy, I ask, has a sprained foot brought him to this pass? August 20th. Home is a good place in August. We have plenty of quote-unquote sapsivines, a footnote says, evidently corruption of sops of wine, a deliciously fragrant early red apple now seemingly extinct, and Moscow transparents, and the sweet apple we call early bough. Our early pears, Madeleine, are past, but blood goods are ripe and ripening, and apricot plums, if we had more trees than the one survivor, are mature. A footnote states, the curculo had just begun its destructive ravages. All knowledge gives superiority, and it makes so little difference in what direction. 'Tis wonderful to expound an Assyrian inscription, but 'tis not less to know a Greek or German word that I do not know, or to see through a galvanic battery, or a chemical combining, or a binomial theorem which I see not at all. Dread the collectors, whether of books, of shells, of coins, of eggs, of newspapers. They become alike trustless. Their hunger overrides their honesty. A forte always makes a foible. Remember Norton's story of the gentleman who passed the antique coin which he believed to be a unique around his dinner table, and lost it. One guest alone refused to be searched, and after it was found on the floor, excused his refusal by announcing that he had a duplicate of the coin at that moment in his pocket. I find Haydon's autobiography one of the best books. He admired Boswell's Johnson, and his book is precious like that. His estimate of himself and his sanguine folly of hoping important results from every compliment or polite look with which any of the great men smooth their leave-taking reminds me of X 50 times. How weak and how strong these English are. The way to make a man famous is to tell the result and skip the means. Sir George Beaumont made the town rush to Wilkie by describing him as, quote, a young man who came to London, saw a picture of Teniers, went home, and at once painted the village politicians. That was the wonder. Quote, at once, my dear Lady Mulgrave, at once. The following is a speech at the dinner to Dr. Holmes, August 29th. Mr. President, when I read the Atlantic, I have had so much to think of the beneficence of wit, its vast utility, the extreme rarity out of this presence of the pure article. Science has never measured the immense profundity of the dunce power. The globe of the world, the diameter of the solar system, is nothing to it. Everywhere 1,000 fathoms of sandstone to a teaspoonful of wit, and yet people speak with apprehension of the dangers of wit, as if there were or could be an excess. We all remember in 1849 it was thought California would make gold so cheap that perhaps it would drive lead and zinc out of use for covering roofs and sink spouts. But here we have had a Mississippi River of gold pouring in from California, Australia, and Oregon for 10 years, and all has not yet displaced one pewter basin from our kitchens, and I begin to believe that if heaven had sent us a dozen men as electrical as Voltaire or Sidney Smith, the old dullness would hold its ground and die hard. Why, look at the fact. Whilst once wit was extremely rare and sparse sown, rare as cobalt, rare as platina, here comes the doctor and flings it about like sea sand, threatens to make it common as newspapers, is actually the man to contract to furnish a chapter of Rabelais or Sidney Smith once a month, buckets full of Greek fire against tons of paunch and acres of bottom. Of course, the danger was that he would throw out of employment all the dunces, the impostors, the slow men, the stock riders, in short, all the respectabilities and professional learning of the time. No wonder the world was alarmed. And yet the old house of unreason stands firm at this day, when he is 50 years old, and he is bound to live 100 in order to spend the half of his treasure. Sir, I have heard that when nature concedes a true talent, she renounces, for once, all her avarice and parsimony, and gives without stint. Our friend here was born in happy hour, with consenting stars. I think his least merits are not small. He is the best critic who constructs. Here is the war of dictionaries in this country. In England, a philological commission to draft a new lexicon. All very well, but the real dictionary is the correct writer, who makes the reader feel, as our friend does, the delicacy and inevitableness of every word he uses, and whose book is so charming that the reader has never a suspicion, amid his peals of laughter, that he is learning the last niceties of grammar and rhetoric. What shall I say of his delight in manners and society and elegance, in short, of his delight in culture, which makes him a civilizer whom every man and woman secretly thanks for valuable hints. What, then, of his correction of popular errors in taste, in behavior, in the uncertain sciences, in the theology attested by the alarm of the synods? And this is only possible to the man who has the capital merit of healthy perception, who can draw all men to read him, whose thoughts leave such cheerful and perfumed memories that when the newsboy enters the car, all over the wide wilderness of America, the tired traveler says, "Here comes the autocrat to bring me 1/2 hour's absolute relief from the vacant mind." Now when a man can render this benefit to his country, or when men can, I cannot enter into the gay controversy between the rival helicons of Croton and the Coctuate, but I desire all men of sense to come into a mutual admiration society, to praise and honor that power. The heartier the praise, the better for all parties. For really, this is not praise of any man. I admire perception wherever it appears. That is the one eternal miracle. I hail the blessed mystery with ever new delight. It lets me into the same joy. Who is Wendell Holmes? If it shines through him, it is not his. It belongs to all men, and we hail it as our own. Honor to the gymnasium and the riding school. When the learned Thineus took his first ride, was it the earnest look of the rider, or some disharmony between the rider and the horse? He could not fail to notice the sympathizing looks of all the passengers, and the good-natured endeavor to look away, which all his acquaintances made. But the excellent Thineus did not like it. September. Mr. Crump. The unfortunate days of August and September, when the 2 cows were due from the Temple pasture, New Hampshire, and did not arrive, and we learn that they had strayed on the way and are lost. When the muster approached, bringing alarms to all housekeepers and orchard owners. When the foot was lame, and the hand was palsied, and the foot mending was lame again. When a strong southwest wind blew in vicious gusts all day, stripping every loaded pear tree of its fruit, just 6 weeks too early. The beggars arrive every day, some on foot. The Sardinians and Sicilians, who cannot argue the question of labor and mendicity with you, since they do not speak a word of English. Then the monumentals, who come in landaus or barouches, and wish your large A to Mount Vernon, Plymouth, Balls Webster, or President Quincy in marble. Then the chipping lady from the Cape, who has 3 blind sisters, and I know not how many dumb ones, and she had been advised to put them in the poorhouse. No, not she. As long as she had health, she would go about and sell these books for them, which I am to buy, and she tosses her head and expects my praises and tears for her heroic resolution, though I had a puzzled feeling that if there was sacrifice anywhere, it was in me, if I should buy them, and I am sure I was very little inclined to toss my head on the occasion. Mr. Crump remarked that he had hated lame folks. There was no telling how hypocritical they were. They are dreadful lame when you see them, but the lamest of them, if he wants something, and there's nobody will help him to it, will manage to get it himself, though it were a mile off, if you are not by. But the fortnight of vexations is not over. I received a letter last night to tell me that Phillips and Sampson will fail in a week. Dr. Johnson. He said of some ode, quote, "Bolder words and more timorous meaning, I think, were never brought together." End quote. The language might be well applied to Dr. Blank's sermons. Quote, "Sir, if you had been dipped in Pactolus, I should have not noticed you." End quote. Quote, "But were there not 6 horses to each coach at Garrick's funeral?" End quote. Quote, "Madame, there were no more 6 horses than 6 phoenixes." End quote. Quote, "A man may ride at any time, if he will set himself doggedly to it," end quote, said Johnson. Of Beauclerk, quote, "No man was ever so free when he was going to say a good thing from a look that expressed that it was coming, or when he had said it from a look that expressed that it had come." End quote. Phillips's letter to the judge and the president on dining at the Revere House is only a logical hit. They are formalists, and he shows them they have outraged their own forms. But he who was not a formalist had not a good right to write the letter. I think wealth has lost much of its value, if it not have wine. I abstain from wine only on account of the expense. When I heard that Mr. Sturgis had given up wine, I had the same regret that I had lately in hearing that Mr. Bowditch had broken his ship, a millionaire without wine, and a millionaire that must lie on his bed. Quote, "We draw back into ourselves and penetrate the false illusions in order that we may better enjoy the true illusions." Herman Grimm. Editor's note. Theodore Parker, whose free religious thought, high ethical teaching, and fearless humanity had drawn together a great congregation at the music hall on Sundays in spite of the attacks of all the sects, had sailed for the Mediterranean shores in vain hope to prolong his life. On the first Sunday of his voyage he smiled as he said, quote, "Emerson is speaking in the music hall today." Mr. Parker's Society, the 28th Congregational of Boston, often asked Mr. Emerson to speak to them on Sunday at the music hall, and he also appeared annually in the course of lectures conducted by the Parker fraternity at the Tremont Temple. His lecture, Courage, was there delivered in November of this year. End note. Aunt Mary. Dr. Johnson is a good example of the force of temperament. 'Tis surprising how often I am reminded of my Aunt Mary Emerson in reading Boswell lately. Johnson impresses his company as she does, not only by the point of the remark, but also when the point fails, because he makes it. Like hers, his obvious religion or superstition, his deep wish that they should think so or so, weighs with them, so rare is depth of feeling, or a constitutional value for a thought or opinion, among the light-minded men and women who make up society. And this, though in both cases their companions know that there is a degree of shortcoming, and of insincerity, and of talking for victory, yet the existence of character and habitual reverence of principles over talent or learning is felt by the frivolous. Are you everywhere? Then you must spend a great deal of money in buying railroad tickets, and that property is worthless. The imagination enters into all the details in a noble's life. Even the shop-boy smoking his cigar assumes the attitude and air of rich gentlemen, and is raised in his own eyes. Chelmsford. I know well the town in which they lived, the landscape which they saw. I spent an autumn and winter among these hills and plains. I knew where the chestnut first spread its brown harvest on a frosty morning for the boys, where the apples covered the ground with white fruit. I saw the last fires that burned in the old lime kiln. I knew the ripples of the Baptist pond, and the woods that grew where the corn is now ripening. Plain, homely land, sandy fields which the Merrimack washes, but the sun and stars do not disdain to fill it with magnificence in June, and with sublime lights in autumn. And I can easily believe that the soldiers you celebrate deserved your praise, for I had an acquaintance with the young men and young women who grew up here in a poverty I suppose as severe, with manners as hearty and plain, and I know that their feeling was tender and their intellect as vigorous as that which opens under softer skies, and in city palaces. I read and conversed with friends here, children of the soil, who showed that force of thought and that sense of right which are the warp and woof of which greatness is woven, that curiosity for knowledge and that delight in intellectual conversation which is the purest joy of youth and the beginning of all national greatness. I suppose it is fair to judge the tree by its fruits, the fathers by the children. These people were original authors of liberty, and not plagiarists, not sentimental nations like the Italians, French, and Hungarians and Germans. These all learned it of our people. Our farmers were all orthodox, Calvinists, mighty in the Scriptures, had learned that life was a preparation and probation, to use their word. They had no romances, but with the pulpit on one hand and poverty and labor on another, They had a third training in the town meeting. They held the fee of their farms. No patron, no ground rents, and great proprietaries, but every man owned his acres. We go to Plutarch and Montaigne for our examples of character, but we might as well go to Pliny and Varro for oaks and firs, which grow as well in our own dooryards and cow pastures. Life is always rich in spontaneous graces, and forces elevate life in every domestic circle, which are overlooked, whilst we are reading something less excellent in old authors. I think as I go through the streets, each one of these innumerable houses has its own calendar of saints, its unpublished anecdotes of courage, of patience, of wit, cheerfulness, for the best I know were in the most private corners. Everything draws to its kind, and frivolous people will not hear of its noble traits. But let any good example of this secret virtue come accidentally to air, like Florence Nightingale, and you will have parallels in every direction. From the obscurity and casualty of those examples which I know, I infer the obscurity and casualty of the like balm and consolation and immortality in 1,000 homes which I do not know, and all around the world. Let it lie safe in the shade there for the compliments and praise of foolish society. It is safer so. All it seems to demand is that we know it when we see it. This is no mean reward. If an intelligent and generous witness passing by sees our plight and so much as exchanges a searching glance of sympathy, quote, "Well done, brave heart," it is better than the thunder of theaters and the world full of newspapers which only echo each other. There are men whose opinion of a book is final. If Ellery Channing tells me, quote, "Here is a good book," I know I have a day longer to live. But there are plenty of able men whose report in that kind is not to be trusted. And in clubs a person of the prowess of G. W. Tyler is inestimable. Ellen H.'s passionate inquiry 20 years ago was, what is the place and use of common people? Or I suppose what Tennyson also meant by reflections of a sensitive second-class mind. Let this question take the first page in the new edition of Notes and Queries. The physicians wisely say that fevers are self-limiting. So are all diseases, sprains and headaches and passions, and all errors like Jupiter's moons, periodical. Editor's note. In October, the whole country was astonished, and the South startled, by John Brown's seizure of the United States arsenal and the town of Harper's Ferry with his few followers in pursuance of a project secretly cherished by him to effect in Virginia what he had done often in a small way in Missouri, namely a gathering and wholesale exodus of slaves to freedom in Canada. At the north of the hundreds who had helped free state settlers to homes in Kansas and Nebraska and furnished them with arms to defend these, only a very few, probably not 10 persons, knew of this design, and very few would have countenanced it. Mr. Emerson knew nothing of it. The seizure of a national arsenal, the stopping of mails, and the proclamation of a provisional government, of course, made the action of Brown treason. The North would not abet the act. The South naturally was in terror of a servile insurrection with frightful consequences. Utter disapproval was general through the country. But when presently it appeared that it was John Brown who was in command, his old acquaintances and friends felt sure that his purposes were humane, if militant, and believed that his fighting would be only defensive in leading away such fugitives as might flock to him. His brave defense, when hemmed in with his handful of men against surrounding hundreds of militia and volunteers, until a company of United States Marines ended the matter in a few moments by assault, with a ladder as battering ram, won admiration, and the fortitude of the severely wounded man at his trial won sympathy, as it won respect from Governor Wise, Colonel Washington, and other Virginians. Finally, his manly speech, when asked if he had anything to say why the death sentence should not be passed, one of the most simple and eloquent in history, based absolutely on Christ's words and human rights, showed him as one forced by his conscience to be a martyr for justice and humanity, victim of a mischievous system which was wrecking the country, and of the laws which guarded that system. End note. The resistance to slavery. It is the old mistake of the slaveholder to impute the resistance to Clarkson or Pitt, to Channing or Garrison, or to some John Brown whom he has just captured, and to make a personal affair of it, and he believes, whilst he chains and chops him, that he is getting rid of his tormentor, and does not see that the air which this man breathed is liberty, and is breathed by thousands and millions, that men of the same complexion as he will look at slaveholders as felons who have disentitled themselves to the protection of law, as the burglar has, whom I see breaking into my neighbor's house, and therefore no matter how many Browns he can catch and kill, he does not make the number less, for the air breeds them, every school, every church, every domestic circle, every home of courtesy. Genius and conscience is educating haters of him and his misdeeds. Editor's note: on the conversion of a valued friend to the Church of Rome. Courage. Here was happiest example of the best blood which in meeting the best born and best bred people of Europe speaks with their speech and deals with them with their own weapons. Ah, I should have been so glad if it could have been said to them, look, I do without your rococo. You have heard much ill of America. I know its good, its blessed simplicity, nor shall I make the mistake of baptizing the daylight in time and space by the names of Jones or Jenkins, in whose shop I chance to behold daylight and space and time. Least of all will I call sacraments those legendary quips of yours, which break the sacraments, which are most my own, my duty to my wife, husband, son, friend, country. Nor can I suffer a monk to whisper to me, to whom God has given such a person as my husband has such children for my confessors and absolvers. We talk of Sparta and Rome, we dilettanti of liberty. But the last thing a brave man thinks of is Sparta or Scythia or the Gauls. He is up to the top of his boots in his own meadow, and can't be bothered with histories. That will do for a winter evening with schoolboys. As soon as a man talks Washington and Putnam and General Jackson to me, I detect the coxcomb and charlatan. He is a frivolous nobody who has no duties of his own. Mount Vernon. I never heard a brave man talk of Mount Vernon, or a religious man of Mount Sinai. They leave that to hypocrites. They have Mount Vernons enough in shoes, and Mount Sinai in their wish to pay their debts. My friend, who has just joined the Church of Rome, was at a loss in talking with me, because I had no church whose weakness she could show up in her return for my charges upon hers. I said to her, do you not see that, though I have no eloquence and no flow of thought, yet that I do not stoop to accept anything less than truth? That I sit here contented with my poverty, mendicity, and deaf and dumb estate, from year to year, from youth to age, rather than adorn myself with any red flag of false church or false association? My low and lonely sitting here by the wayside is my homage to truth, which I see is sufficient without me, which is honored by my abstaining, not by my superserviceableness. I see how grand and self-sufficing it is, how it burns up, and will none of your shifty patchwork of additions and ingenuities. October. High courage, or a perfect will superior to all events, makes a bond of union between two enemies. Inasmuch as Governor Wise is a superior man, he distinguished John Brown. As they confer, they understand each other swiftly, each respects the other. If opportunity allowed, they would prefer each other's society and desert the rest. Enemies would become affectionate, rivals and enemies. Hector and Achilles, Wellington and Soult become aware that they are nearer and liker than any other two, and if their nation and circumstances did not keep them apart, would fly into each other's arms. See, too, what contagion belongs to it. It finds its own with magnetic affinity all over the land. Heroic women offer themselves as nurses to the brave veteran. Florence Nightingale brings lint and the blessing of her shadow. The troop of infantry that cut him down asks leave to pay their respects to the prisoner. Poetry and eloquence catch the hint. Everything feels the new breath, excepting the dead old doting politicians, whom the trumpet of resurrection cannot waken. The following is a poem entitled War. There was no need of trumpets, there was no need of banners. Every zephyr was a bugle, every wood thrush sang hosannas. Sharp steel was his lieutenant, and powder was his men. The land was all electric, the mountain echoes roar. Every crutch became a pike. The woods and meadows shouted war. Every valley shouted strike. Courage charms us, because it indicates that a man loves an idea better than all things in the world, that he is thinking neither of his bed, nor his dinner, nor his money, but will venture all to put in act the invisible thought of his mind. We value idealists who do not rest in ideas, but convey them into things. He converts the earth to use, the earth is prouder to bear him, the air to feed his lungs. He accepts an ideal standard. Freedom is ideal. It means not to have land or money or pleasure, but to have no other limitation than that which his own constitution imposes. I am free to speak the truth. I am free to do justly. I am not free to lie. And I wish to break every yoke all over the world which hinders my brother from acting after his best thought. Brown shows us, said Henry Thoreau, another school to send our boys to, that the best lesson of oratory is to speak the truth. A lesson rarely learned, to stand by the truth. We stand by our party, our trade, our reputation, our talent, but these each lead away from the truth. That is so volatile and vital, evanescing instantly from all but dedication to it. And yet inspiration is that, to be so quick as truth, to drop the load of memory and of futurity, memory and care, and let the moment suffice us. Then one discovers that the first thought is related to all thought and carries power and fate in its womb. There must of course be a minority of intelligent gentlemen in Virginia sufficiently Catholic to appreciate the public objection of all the states where slavery does not exist, and to understand therefore the inevitable sympathy which all writers, and through them the civilized world, generally feel with Captain John Brown, and Virginians also, as soon as the temporary heats are forgotten. I shall not insult you by referring to a public opinion changing every day, and which has softened every hour its first harsh judgment of him. The man is so transparent that all can see through him, that he had no second thought, but was the rarest of heroes, a pure idealist with no buy-ins of his own. He is therefore precisely what lawyers call crazy, being governed by ideas and not by external circumstances. He has afforded them the first trait marked in the books as betraying insanity, namely, disproportion between means and ends. Ideas make real societies and states. My countryman is surely not James Buchanan, nor Caleb Cushing, nor Barnum, nor Governor Gardiner, nor Lot Poole, nor Fernando Wood, but Thoreau and Alcott and Sumner, and whoever lives in the same love and worship as I, every just person, every man or woman who knows what truth means. It will always be so. Every principle is a war note. Whoever attempts to carry out the rule of right and love and freedom must take his life in his hand. Pierre de Auvergne, troubadour of the 12th century, sings, quote, I will sing a new song which resounds in my breast. Never was a song good or beautiful which resembled any other. Fauriel 11:13. Quote, Since the air renews itself and softens, so must my heart renew itself, and what buds in it buds and grows outside of it. Quote, the nightingale glitters on the bough. I see at the edge of the snowbank the hardy blades of young grass prying holes through the ice and lifting themselves above it. Phillips goes to the popular assembly as others go to their library. Whilst he speaks, his mind feeds animal spirits, enthusiasm, insight, and decision. The intellect delights in seeing the traces of a law which, hiding itself, yet indicates at distant points its presence. And that it is which makes us so fond of pictures of fate. We say there is no lawless particle. Fate is the superstition, law is the science, but it needs virtue to see straight. Intellect pure of action is skeptical. Being and so doing must blend before the eye has health to behold through sympathy and through presence the spirit. Then all flows and is known without words. Power even is not known to the pure. Power indicates weakness and opposition. Health exists and unfolds in the rose, in the sea, in the circular and endless astronomy. The electricity is not less present in my body, and my joy for 20 years that I never saw or suspected it, than in the 21st when I drew by art a spark from my knuckle. It may be that we have no right here as individuals, that the existence of an embodied man marks fall and sin. To be pure, we must live in God radiant and flowing, constituting the health and conservation of the universe. We have stopped, we have stagnated, we have appropriated or become selfish before we could arrest our immortality into this callous or wen of an individual, and have been punished by the wars, infirmities, and fate of human life. The wise East Indian seeks nirvana or reabsorption as felicity. It is for this reason that we are dualists and know the law of our members as opposed to the good, and hence the inexplicable jangle of fate and freedom, matter and spirit. Hence the indignation of the poet, the scorn of the idealist, to whom geology and zoology are often an impertinence. The believing we do something when we do nothing is the first illusion of tobacco. The bath. The cutaneous sublime, the extremes meet, the bitter sweet, the pale of pleasure and of pain. Oh, if any enemy had done this! John Brown. He drew this notice and distinction from the people among whom he fell from the fact that this boy of 12 had conducted his drove of cattle 100 miles alone. Culture, books. The Indian who carried a letter from the French governor through the forest hid it when he would eat or do any unsightly office. Atanalfa caused a Spaniard to write "die" on his thumbnail, and when Pizarro could not read it, despised him. What a wonder we make of Cadmus, or whatever inventor of letters, and what an ado about the invention of printing, this month again on Franklin's birthday. Then what a debt is ours to books, how much we owe to imaginative books. The boy has no better friend or influence than his Scott, Shakespeare, Plutarch, and Homer. And if, in Arkansas or Texas, I should meet a man reading Horace, I were no stranger, and should forget the dreary land. Yet there is a limit to this influence also. After reading Adam Smith or Linnaeus, I am no better mate for Mr. Hosmer or Mr. Potter. And one book crowds out another, so that after years of study we are not wiser. Then books can't teach mother wit, sagacity, presence of mind, and humanity. Editor's note. On the 2nd of December, John Brown was hanged at Charlestown, Virginia. In Concord, on that afternoon, a strangely sultry day with threatening clouds and something ominous in the air, there was a gathering of persons who honored his motives and great sacrifices in the cause of human freedom in the town hall. Reverend Edmund Sears of Wayland made a prayer. Mr. Emerson and Mr. Alcott made brief speeches. Mr. Thoreau read Sir Walter Raleigh's Soul's Errand. Honorable John S. Keyes selected verses from A. Town's Execution of Montrose, and Mr. Sanborn contributed a poem. Mr. Emerson spoke at Boston on November 18th and at Salem on January 6th, at meetings for the relief of the Brown family. It should also be recorded that, soon after, Mr. Sanborn invited as pupils in his successful private school 3 daughters of John Brown, Anna, Sarah, and the widow of Thompson, killed at Harper's Ferry, and they came. End note. This is the end of Journal Collection number 50, dating from the year 1859, when the author was 56 years old. Thank you for listening.